Let's toss it over to the fourth member of our broad.
Stanionis can make use of angle changes, mainly to continue his offense from advantageous positioning. Be it against orthodox or southpaw opponents, he likes to angle off and attack while his op is out of position, or just as they're turning the match. Or simple steps towards the strong side to open his opponent's center line and attack. Angles like these can normally be matched by properly pivoting or stepping to the open spot to match the new positioning. Jaron is shown to either completely ignore these fundamentals at worst, or at best be wildly inconsistent in doing so, oftentimes failing to pivot in time, rhythm step, or half step, allowing his op to get to the angle and attack. Jaron also uses angle changes at times, which could be especially effective against Stanionis, as his high guard presents an opportunity for Jaron to control his gloves and step to an angle easier. Stanionis will sometimes employ level changes to freeze his opponents and later disguise his offensive attack given their reaction. For example, attacking if his op shows up, throwing crosses when his op goes into a Philly shell, or counterpunching. Though the risks of this will be discussed later. This could end up being successful against Ennis, as he has a few dangerous reactions to the level change. Pairing without a step back to leave range opens the clear and obvious lane on the right side of his head and leaves him relying upon a single shield to block rear hands in the closed stance. With this, Jaron will have to guess the trajectory of his opponent's most powerful punch, a gamble seldom won for long. Even if he does properly block the punch, it could carry enough power to blast through the shield regardless. And that's if he chooses to keep the lead hand up at all. He'll sometimes drop it entirely, and it's even worse for obvious reasons. He may also default to the Philly shell after probing his lead hand, squaring his shoulders and creating openings to the head. Stanionis likes to use full step-in single mid-range jabs where he falls in the range, launching off his back foot and landing heavy on the front foot, afterwards staying stationary mid-range to inside in a high guard waiting to counterpunch. This is a risky trap of sorts, as it assumes that his opponent will allow a 50-50 engagement and start running their offense, and carries the usual risks of the single mid-range jab, that being trading the relatively weak jab for any number of more devastating counterpunches. Jaron Ennis is one of boxing's most dynamic counterpunchers, and he should have a host of jab counters waiting for Stanionis. But whether or not he'll oblige the 50-50 positioning and fall for Stanionis' trap is something we'll discuss later. For the most part, Stanionis fights behind a rigid and active high guard. He takes refuge behind the immobile shields to block incoming punches, but openings still exist around the flanks and down the pipe. Ennis is skilled at attacking the holes in the high guard, and also using probes and manipulations to occupy gloves and create openings to slice up the guard. Stanionis also occasionally employs active high guard principles, where he'll move his gloves to pick off and parry punches, meaning it can then be feinted out of position to create more lanes for offense. Jaron possesses an elite lead hand. He uses it to probe and control distance both going forward and backwards, feint to draw out his opponent's defensive reactions, and as a base to start controlling his opponent. As a southpaw, he uses his lead hand to fence in the open stance, find to control the jab lane and establish lead hand dominance. Once established, Boots can utilize a fast and accurate jab. If he's using the inactive high guard, Stanionis doesn't usually fence in the open stance, meaning that Jaron will likely be able to establish his lead hand rather easily. Given these skills, he may be able to draw out Stanionis' active high guard and take advantage. Stanionis has a reset pattern that can be taken advantage of. He'll often cross-step backwards, gather his feet, and then reset his lead foot back in the range. This can be brought out by attacking his guard with combinations or crosses and stab jabs to the body that break his base and begin the process. He's vulnerable at every point. His feet cross, which isn't quick enough to evade an advancing opponent, breaks his base and compromises his balance. He gathers his feet, which again is in a boxing stance and compromises his balance, and his lead foot resets back in the punching range, which can be timed and attacked. Jaron uses the stab jab to attack high guards in the orthodox stance. As a southpaw, he prefers the cross, which is usually thrown after using jab feints to occupy the guard. Stanionis will often crosswalk or cross-step while trying to cut off the ring. It'll never be more efficient than matching lateral steps with equal opposite footwork, i.e., my opponent steps with his right, I step with my left to match his lateral step and cut off the angle. Which he does far too inconsistently. As we mentioned before, crossing your feet compromises your balance, takes you out of stance, and leaves you vulnerable. This may cause you to lose contain on an opponent moving laterally. If he does pin down his op, full step-in single mid-range jabs either leave him heavy on the front foot or with a narrow or relatively bladed stance, all of which may lead to him losing contain. And a tendency to reach would also allow an opponent to more easily evade and continue their movement. This would of course open Emantis to a variety of traps, mainly lateral traps, which Jaron may use. A lateral trap is simply moving left or right, waiting for your opponent to turn or follow to match the new positioning, and attacking before or just as they set their feet. Stanionis may struggle if Jaron employs this type of strategy. Of course, it isn't that simple. Earlier, I pondered whether or not Jaron will fall for Stanionis' trap and oblige equal positioning. His history says it's very likely, and so, elements of his game, especially inside, must be called into question. Jaron often defaults to a Philly shell on the inside, which can be problematic. As the Philly shell is inherently bladed, when he uses it on the inside, he's often in a disadvantageous position. He'll assume positioning where he and his opponent resemble the letter T or a number 7, where he's the stem in relation to his more squared opponent. The rear hand is usually able to account for attacks on that side, but if the lead hand, which is in a sling, isn't framing to control his opponent's hand on that side, he's open to and perhaps partially blinded to attacks from that direction. He also employs controls to aid his offense, where he possesses a nuanced ability to use frames, pins and posts, and head controls to off-balance and shut down engagements. However, these controls are often soft as opposed to physical. If a control fails to blind or off-balance his opponent, they may choose to fight through the control and land on the opening. Jaron has shown a strange tendency to freeze or take pictures defensively on the inside, making a defensive movement and staying there longer than he should, anticipating the next punch in sequence even if it doesn't come, and leaving him open to get hit by something else. Finally, as Jaron grows into an inside fight, he begins to become blasé with his defensive responsibility, either allowing himself to become reliant on his reflexes and defensive instincts to bail him out, or simply eating punches to land his own. As I previously mentioned, Emantis likes to change levels and stay there near constantly, and usually manifests as bobbing onto his lead leg and waiting. Due to the frequency of this maneuver, he's open to hooks to the body and head. He's known to counterpunch from this position, along with the earlier mentioned position after a single mid-range jab. Here on the inside, his counterpunching bag opens up, preferring to counter with lead hooks after slipping or block and shoot counters. Stanionis' calling card is his inside combinations, most commonly throwing the 3-4, but beyond that he does a great job varying his combinations to the head and body with a full punch selection. Emantis possesses a control game, though it isn't nearly as nuanced as Jaron's. Mainly, he uses frames to push off and create space to punch or disengage. There of course exists an avenue for Boots to win this fight with relative ease, controlling distance, running Stanionis into traps, abusing his high guard, breaking his base, rinse and repeat. However, against pretty much every pressure fighter he's faced in his career, Boots has turned the fight into a 50-50 showdown, where he takes much more punishment than is needed, but in the end is bailed out by his size, athleticism, and power. This time, Ennis will be facing the best inside fighter he's seen so far, but I don't see the outcome being much different. Stanionis will likely see a great deal of success on the inside, but eventually be overwhelmed by the speed and power differential. I predict Boots will box at first, then oblige a war, making an extremely entertaining fight for the fans, but risking the upset. All in all, I favor Ennis by knockout. Stanionis has a puncher's chance on the inside, but he isn't known to crack, and Jaron has shown a good beard at welterweight. Also, this is Stanionis' second fight in 3 years due to surgery and cancellations, which could play a part into how sharp he is on the night. Let me know how you got it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.